They told her it was the happiest day of her life. They dressed her in saffron, braided her hair like a priestess, and called it sacred. But as the sun began to fall over Rome, Valyria Quentina understood a truth no historian carved into marble. Some ceremonies are not celebrations, they are transfers. Tonight, a girl would become a wife, and Rome would call it beautiful. In the atrium of her father's house, beneath frescoed gods and the smell of burning incense, a 19-year-old bride stood perfectly still while senators drank to her future. Outside, musicians prepared wedding songs that had echoed through Roman streets for centuries. Inside, her mother whispered only one instruction: survive. Not love, not hope, survive. Because when the torches were lit and the procession began, she would not walk into her husband's home, she would be carried, as brides had been carried since the founding of the city, since the night Rome stole its first wives and called it destiny. The law would bless it, the guests would cheer it, the priests would sanctify it. But behind the final door, beyond the laughter and ritual fire, awaited a truth so ordinary that Rome never bothered to record it: a husband's right, a bride's silence, a ritual repeated thousands of times, hidden not by secrecy, but by normalcy. What happened in that chamber shaped generations. It determined survival, status, legacy. It defined whether a woman would rise within her household or disappear inside it. And for 2,000 years, history preferred to speak of emperors and battles rather than the night that decided the fate of Rome's daughters. Tonight, we open that door. The veil of obedience. Before the torches were lit, before the crude jokes echoed through Roman streets, there was a silence no one wrote about, a silence stitched into saffron cloth, a silence every bride understood and every empire required. The veil smelled faintly of crushed crocus and something else, salt from her mother's tears, absorbed into the fabric when it was pressed too tightly against trembling hands. Valyria Quentina stood in the atrium of her father's domus as sunlight thinned into amber across marble floors, feeling the weight of history settle onto her shoulders like a verdict. Rome called this day sacred, the law called it lawful, the poets called it beautiful. But among women, in corridors where men did not linger, it had another name: the night of endurance. She was 19, the legal age for marriage, trained since childhood to spin wool, manage servants, lower her gaze, and obey the authority of her paterfamilias. Until this morning she had belonged to her father, under the iron doctrine of patria potestas, the absolute power Roman fathers wielded over their households. By tomorrow, that power would not disappear, it would simply change hands. Her tunica recta clung to her skin, woven by her own fingers as tradition demanded, its threads symbolic of virtue and obedience. Her hair had been parted with the tip of a spear and braided into 6 severe locks, an echo of the Vestal Virgins, purity arranged like ritual architecture. Around her waist lay the knot of Hercules, tied tight and deliberate, a symbol Rome pretended was playful, but every bride knew was not. Only her husband would untie it, only he would decide how quickly it would come undone. Across the atrium, senators laughed, cups of Falernian wine raised high, discussing alliances and dowries as if negotiating livestock. Her marriage to Gaius Servilius Capio, 41, widower, politically useful, strengthened both families. That was the true ceremony. The rest was theater. Her mother adjusted the flammeum, fingers lingering longer than necessary. "It will be over by morning," she whispered, a sentence passed from generation to generation like an inheritance of caution. Not comfort, not hope, survival. In Roman legal texts preserved in fragments, marriage was described as a transfer, manus and sine manu, cum manu. Technicalities historians debate, but the lived reality remained constant. A woman's body moved from one authority to another. Ownership was ritualized. The wedding was not simply a union. It was an acquisition. In the earliest centuries of Rome, wives were legally absorbed into the husband's household cult. Later reforms softened the language, but not the power. Even when property laws evolved, the social expectation did not. A husband's right over his wife's body was assumed, unquestioned, embedded like mortar in stone. As sunset approached, musicians began tuning pipes and lyres. Outside, boys prepared to shout obscenities as tradition demanded. Jokes about consummation, shouted loudly enough to make the private inevitable feel communal, normalized. Rome disguised tension with laughter. It always had. The threshold ritual awaited her at the end of the procession. She would not walk into her new home. She would be carried. The official explanation traced back to superstition, to avoid stumbling. The older explanation whispered of the Sabine women, abducted, claimed, absorbed into a growing empire. Rome's foundation myth was not romance, it was taking, and every bride reenacted that taking in miniature. Valyria felt fear coil in her stomach, but beneath it something colder formed. Calculation. She had listened to her Aunt Cornelia. She understood that ignorance was more dangerous than pain. Some husbands were brutal. Some were indifferent. A rare few were gentle. There was no law requiring gentleness. Only reputation and temperament limited cruelty. The marriage bed awaited in a room prepared with incense and flowers, symbols attempting to perfume inevitability. Archaeologists have reconstructed Roman bridal chambers from frescoes and texts, but no fresco preserves the sound of a girl steadying her breath. No inscription records the moment she understands that resistance is futile because the culture itself stands behind the door. The sun finally touched the horizon. Torches flared alive, shadows stretching across marble walls like grasping hands. Guests began chanting traditional phrases, half blessing, half warning. Valyria stepped forward when called, spine straight, face composed into the serene mask Rome demanded of its daughters. Each step toward the gate of her father's house felt like walking deeper into a story written centuries before her birth. Rome celebrated conquest openly on battlefields. In wedding chambers, conquest wore flowers. And as the first torchlight swallowed the last of the day, Valyria understood something chilling. The empire did not need chains to claim her. Tradition was enough. The ritual of taking. She would not step across the threshold. She would be lifted as brides had been for centuries. Rome said it was tradition. History whispers it was rehearsal. The procession wound through the darkening streets of Rome like a slow-burning fuse, torches hissing against the evening air, while musicians forced cheer into melodies older than memory. Neighbors leaned from balconies, calling blessings mixed with crude jests, their laughter echoing off stone walls polished by generations of footsteps. To an outsider, it might have looked festive. To a Roman bride, it was inevitability marching beside her. Valyria walked between flame and shadow, aware that every step was ceremonial and irreversible. Gaius Servilius Capio remained at her side, composed, distant, his presence solid as the empire itself. He did not need to touch her. The law already had. The chants grew louder as they approached his domus. Among them were words preserved in fragments by Roman writers, phrases that openly referenced consummation, fertility, domination. The vulgarity was intentional. By speaking what would happen aloud, Rome transformed private fear into public expectation. If everyone laughed, then nothing could be questioned. Ritual has always been power disguised as celebration. Even the boys carrying torches understood their roles better than they realized. They were illuminating the path of possession. When they reached the doorway, silence fell with unsettling precision. The threshold lay ahead, a simple strip of stone worn smooth by decades of entry and exit. Yet this narrow line held meaning deeper than marble. In Roman belief, thresholds were liminal spaces, spiritually charged, guarded by household gods. Crossing it marked transformation. But a bride did not cross. She was carried. Strong hands lifted Valyria before her sandals could touch the stone. The movement was practiced, almost gentle, yet unmistakably firm. She felt her body shift from vertical autonomy to horizontal burden in a heartbeat. Ancient historians like Livy recorded Rome's founding myth, the seizure of the Sabine women, with patriotic pride. During a festival, early Roman men abducted neighboring women to secure wives and ensure population growth. It was framed as necessity, destiny, even divine sanction. The ritual threshold, many scholars argue, echoed that origin story. Every Roman marriage reenacted a symbolic abduction. Not because force was still required, but because memory was. Rome built identity through repetition. By carrying a bride into her husband's home, society quietly affirmed that marriage began with taking. Valyria felt the weight of that myth in the arms that held her. She was not struggling. Resistance would have been improper. Yet the symbolism required no struggle to be real. She was being delivered, deposited, installed. When her feet finally touched the floor of her husband's atrium, applause erupted as though a victory had been secured. Wine was poured. Offerings were made to the household gods. The ritual fire burned steadily, its flame reflecting in polished bronze and watchful eyes. Gaius stepped forward and presented her with fire and water, ancient symbols of domestic responsibility. Fire for the hearth she would tend, water for the purification she would oversee. Rome called this honor. In practice, it was assignment. She would manage servants, oversee accounts, produce heirs, preserve the family name. Her identity narrowed into function with ceremonial precision. Then came the formal words, "Where you are Gaius, I am Gaia." The phrase erased her lineage in a single breath. Her name dissolved into his. Historians debate the legal nuances of Roman marriage, whether a woman remained under her father's authority or passed fully into her husband's control. Yet documents agree on one truth. Socially, economically, and physically, her life would revolve around his will. The law did not need to shout. Custom enforced what statutes merely outlined. As guests drifted into rooms heavy with incense and congratulation, the laughter resumed. But beneath it pulsed anticipation. Everyone knew what followed ceremony. Everyone pretended it was natural. The praenuba, the married matron who oversaw the rites, approached Valyria and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It is time," she said quietly, her tone carrying neither joy nor pity, only experience. The bedchamber waited beyond another door, perfumed, prepared, inevitable. And somewhere within